Welcome to Cocktails Over Coffee, a podcast that spotlights truly inspiring individuals that have taken a leap of faith by leaving their corporate careers, otherwise known as their coffee, to pursue their passion, otherwise known as their cocktail. I'm Janae Green, and I'm so excited to be here with travel and culture writer, Katie. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, so excited to chat. First of all, how are you doing? How's travel going right now? Is it going?
It is. I mean, it's definitely a complicated time for travel.
Yeah.
But I do feel that the desire to travel isn't going to go away. And I think that, what makes it an unknown moment for travel is what makes it unknown for every industry, in the sense that I believe, when the lockdown first happens, people, I'm a delusional optimist, so I don't mind early deadlines, but it'll be normal by summer. And
yeah,
now we're sort of looking at fall of next year. So safety protocols, and as people sort of emerge and this might become the new normal, figuring out ways that you can travel safely, not just safely for your own well-being, but to protect others.
Yeah.
So that's something that is going to be interesting. But for me, just personally, I focused a lot on international travel.
Okay.
And I grew up traveling all across the U.S. But I hadn't been writing about it as much because I was prioritizing new experiences for a couple of years, and now sort of finding ways to look at places that you might have overlooked and seeing different sides to it. And since the pandemic, about halfway through, I relocated to Wyoming. Okay. And that's been really great for travel because I think more and more people are discovering the Mountain West.
I went to Wyoming for the first time this summer. And I think
it's amazing.
It's beautiful. And it was so funny. One of my friends texted me. She's like, is everyone randomly going to Wyoming? And I was like,
yes.
Yeah, actually, you may be right. And I feel like, you probably know why, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit.
Well, it's the least populated state in the nation. So it's really easy to socially distance. Yeah. And, the Rockies are as gorgeous. In my opinion, the Tetons, where I am in Wyoming, are the most beautiful mountains in the world. And a lot of people didn't prioritize them as much, I think, growing up, or just in general, there's the Alps, there's the Andes. Right. And there's this funny meme, like, it looks like the Mykonos crowd discovered Yellowstone this summer.
100%.
And I do think that that's totally true. Yeah. And I think that that's one good thing that could happen. And I think travel is great for building empathy and understanding. And fingers crossed, knock on wood, depending on the outcome of the election, being able to do more domestic travel. And hopefully there's a moment where we can all come together. Yeah. But I think that definitely, it's so hard to travel anywhere from within the U.S. Everyone in Europe is always like, I'm so well traveled. And it's like, well, going from London to France is the equivalent of going from New York to Cape Cod.
It's so easy.
Yeah. And it's hard. And it's honestly, like, domestic airline travel, airfare is really expensive in the U.S., more so than other places as well. So I think that people are like, all right, I've got 1 week, rather than going to, somewhere in the United States, I'm going to maybe go to Greece. Right. And I think that has changed a bit too.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start from the beginning. First of all, cheers. We've got our cocktails.
Cheers. Disclaimer.
Yes, exactly.
Cocktails.
So tell me where you started out. What were you doing for work? What was your 9 to 5?
I started out at the very, very beginning of my career, working at a newspaper company. And I started out doing tear sheets for advertisers. And then I started writing obituaries, which truly, working in newspapers, I think really helped my career now. But also, working in obits at the very beginning, it's like, this is the last word. Like, you don't want to get this wrong. Right. And then I worked as a reporter. And I would do that during my summers before college. And then the summer after my junior year of college, I got an internship at an advertising agency. And, I didn't love it, but I was graduating in 2009 during sort of the peak of the recession. And everyone was like, oh, this is a great job. And, like, to quote Bruce Springsteen, like a river that don't know where it's flowing. I took a wrong turn and I just kept going. Like, advertising was I was never quite great at it. I worked as a media planner, which is where I think a lot of people can end up where they're not really sure where they want to go. And I worked in advertising for a decade, essentially. Okay. My 9 to 5 was like, it wasn't advertising truly like creative advertising. It was more like deciding where ads go, which is a very mathematic, precise formula. Yes. And I just have never had a head for numbers ever. And it wasn't really something that played to my strengths,
Okay.
but the idea of becoming, and I always wanted to become a writer, but the idea of being a writer, particularly, it was sort of an in-between moment where magazines were at their peak and then they weren't.
Yes.
And digital was sort of the Wild West. So it was almost like you're going to get an editorial assistant at Cosmo or Vogue or whatever, or you're not going to be in the field. So I just thought to myself, okay, I'm going to work in advertising. And my long-term goal was, and then I'll move in-house at a magazine and I'll work in marketing. And then I don't know how I expected this to happen, but somehow, you know, I would transition once I was in the house from marketing to edit, which is not quite as simple as it sounds. It's quite difficult. And I mean, now, due to like branded content and influencers and, you know, it's a merge. The line has become more blurred than ever.
For sure.
But particularly at that time. So I was really bad at my job. Like literally got fired from each one because I was so horrific, but I kept falling upward. And that's something I have to say about breaking off on your own. There is sort of a safety net when you're working in a corporate environment where there are hundreds of media planner positions. And I just saw my future being just like a mid-level executive and being miserable.
Yeah.
So what I did, sort of how I would say, are we going to move on to how I got out of it yet?
Yeah. Let's go right. You're headed right there. So how did you get out of it? And when? Like, how long were you doing the media planning?
Yeah. So and this is so funny because it wasn't even that long ago, but I'm like, what year did I graduate from grad school? But when I was 25, and like, let's be honest here too, I was a hot mess because I would, you know, I think everyone has something that torments them. I think it's from Sex and the City, where it's either like, it's your boyfriend, it's your job, or it's your apartment.
Yes.
So at that moment, it was really my job. You know what I mean? And it was like, I would get drunk and cry and be like, I'm never going to not do this. And for me, I mean, I'm a Capricorn. I don't know, like literally my like religion, my astrology, but what I do really played a huge role in who I am and who I view myself to be, just because your job, what you do every day, is so much of your life. And if you're doing something you hate 9 to 5, let's be real, 9 to 11,
you're
5 days a week. And I felt parts of my personality changing. I sort of, at work, suddenly people were like, oh, she's so quiet, which no one would ever say about me. But like, I felt like I was losing myself.
Yeah.
So I applied to graduate school and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I was like, I'm going to get my master's degree in literature. So in college, you know, my thesis was on like suicidal American poets. I love literary criticism.
Okay.
And I was like, I'll go in like this. And people were like, well, maybe you should get your PhD. But I'd heard so many sort of horror stories about getting a PhD and not getting a teaching position.
Yeah.
Plus, even though I feel like in another life, I would have been an amazing poetry. I would have done post-World War II American poetry professor.
Love that. So interesting.
Yes. I think that would have been another life path for me. I just wasn't sure that I wanted to live in like upstate New York and do that. Do you know what I mean? And like, I really liked being in New York City. So I applied to graduate programs in New York and London and master's programs. And I applied to like a couple schools in London. And then in New York, I did like Columbia, New School, NYU.
Wait, let me ask you a question. Was grad school a way for you to get out, or was it always a part of the plan? Like, why grad school?
A way to get out for me. Because here's my thing is that I knew that I wouldn't regret getting this degree, even though I think everything is so overpriced. At the very least, one thing I read that was really helpful to me was, don't go to grad school just to get that raise or to get that career shift, because it might not come.
Right.
Only go to grad school if you know that you will actually enjoy the process.
Yes.
And for me, I love being an English student, and I loved writing, learning. Like, I loved the conversations in class, and so I was like, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
And then I got waitlisted at Columbia, and I got into New School with like an academic scholarship, which I hadn't even applied for. To people who are listening to this in college, like, really develop relationships with some professors, because it matters what college you go to, but if you have someone backing you up and helping you out along the way, that makes a huge difference. And I went to Hobart William Smith for undergraduate.
Okay.
And my professor minded on Professor Parker. I emailed Professor Parker yesterday. Their recommendations for me were so detailed and passionate, and they helped me so much that I really credit them to where I am now.
Okay. So, that's a great tip though.
Yes. So I got into New School and I was like, do I want to go here? Because also in my head, I was like, well, is grad school going to be just sort of a something that's like a name brand. Like if I'm not getting into Columbia, do I even want to bother with new school?
Yeah.
Well, and here's what I have to say. Like, number one, if you are passionate about something, like going to a place where other people are passionate about it too and gives you that reinforcement is amazing. And number two, if you're not positive, like I was like, maybe I'll do a professorship. Mainly I just wanted to go and get myself back in the writing sphere.
Yes.
New school was amazing because it has the flexibility where I entered and I thought I'd be going on to my PhD route. And I ended up graduating almost with an MFA. Like I wrote a book during it, and being around people who were like, I'm a professor, I'm going to be a scholar of Greek antiquity. I was like, well, if you're a scholar of Greek antiquity, like I can be a writer. You know, it was just so exciting being around other people who share that passion. 2-year program. And I almost felt like my heart was at rest for 2 years. Like I was working full time and in school full time, but I wasn't as depressed as I'd been because that need to write for me was satiated. And then it was only until
how were you able to maintain both though? Because most people will do part-time work, part-time school, full-time work, full-time school, you know? So how were you able to do full-time both? I mean, that's a lot.
I think the busier you are, sometimes the more efficient you are. I look back on it now and I'm like, I would wake up at 5 a.m. to exercise, very self-loathing. But also it was like the boutique, New York City, whatever, fitness classes. And then I'd go to work until 8. Then I'd go to class from 8 till 11. And then once or twice a week, I'd go to the library and stay there till 6 a.m. And I just did it. But I also really liked what I was doing. Like I loved school.
Yeah.
And so
you enjoyed your schedule. It didn't exhaust you because you were enjoying it.
I enjoyed it, and I felt like I was working towards something I wanted to be in life.
Yes. Okay.
I think if I was getting my MBA and I was going to work, and then afterwards I had to do like model. I have no idea what people do in their MBAs, obviously. I did not go that route.
Right.
I think I'd be miserable, but I wasn't studying for tests. I was reading philosophy. I was reading novels. I was reading criticism, and I was writing. So I enjoyed it a lot. And, you know, in college, I feel like a eureka moment was like, I don't need to pretend to be interested in art history anymore. Like I can only take English classes. And that's sort of true with grad school. You take classes you want to take. And that's why I feel like going to a school, taking something you're passionate about makes a difference there.
Yes.
And I graduated and I got this job at Audible, like an agency working for Audible. And they were like, this is going to be the perfect blend of your English background and your media backgrounds. And I was like, oh, I've nailed it. And I was miserable. And like one thing I feel like you should know is that if you want to do a creative profession, unless you're actually doing that creative thing, it's never really what you think it is. And it was like a lot of like accounting. And I was working on a Bruce Springsteen partnership for his memoir, Born to Run, which everyone should read.
Incredible.
It was a year into my Audible time. And I remember walking to work and being like, I could kill myself right now. I don't care. I was like, I could drop dead. I don't care about doing this anymore.
Wow.
I was like, I'm only working so I can maintain my apartment and travel on weekends. But like
out of survival.
That drive just left me. And I wouldn't, and I don't take it back in like early 20s. I think it was extremely important for me to be going out every night of the week and going to Jamaica on a whim. But I do feel that, you know, my priorities sort of shifted where it was like, I really want to be a writer. And if I'm not going to do this now, I'll never do this. Yeah. And then when that Bruce Springsteen partnership fell through, which was so symbolic looking back on it, that it was like the one program I was passionate about, was my downfall. Heads rolled. I was let go. And then immediately the next day I got headhunted for all of these other positions in advertising. Wow. And I was like, no, like now is the time. I'm going to write.
Wait, so did you put your information out there? How did all these people come to you?
Just working in New York and having your LinkedIn and having like experience, people are always going to be looking for more people like that. Do you know what I mean? And it's also a classic case of falling upward. Yes. I feel like I'm like very privileged to like be like a white woman. Do you know what I mean? I can't imagine how much more difficult it is for people who are dealing with like sexuality or racial discrimination. Like it just sort of, it just felt like I was a cog in a machine that was just built to fit me in. Yeah. And I was like, I could keep but you know, with each new job, I'd be like, I'm going to care. But I think that one of the reasons I struck out on my own is that if I care about something, I'm obsessive. And if I don't, I'm just not. And some people can have very happy lives advertising socks, and that doesn't define them. And they have all these other great things they do. But for me, like, I just wasn't satisfied. And I moved home. And ironically, I was like, what do I have to give up? And I was like, well, I have to give up traveling because I can no longer afford to travel. Right. And then the greatest irony or serendipity, it turned out that now with this new job, with being a writer, I was able to travel to parts of the world that like I thought I'd have to wait until I was unhappily on a honeymoon, somewhere,
Yes.
I was like, I thought
Unhappily
I'd
on
have
a
to wait
honeymoon.
forever. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I started out and I was like, I'm gonna get this book published, which is its own
The
ball.
book that you wrote in school, in your
Yes.
graduate program.
Yes. And so I was working with an agent, and you have to be comfortable with rejection. I got lucky where like I sent it out to 10 agents and everyone was like, don't worry if nobody wants it. You will find someone. Someone did want it. And then I worked on them with them on edits. And then I was waiting for her feedback. And while I was waiting for her feedback, I was like, I'm going to start freelance writing. One of my best friends, Lizzie Brown, who's a writer, she helped me with learning how to pitch. And I felt very lucky to have that because I had a good friend who I would be like, is this working out? So my recommendation too, if you don't have any friends who are in the field, don't be super discouraged. There are a lot of different outlets where you can literally Google pitch template. Yeah. And just what you have to do is you have to make a website, which like I still spend hours on it. But I was lucky because I'd worked as a reporter that I had all these bylines. So, I started out with my little website and I would send an email. Hi, my name's Catherine Parker Maggie. I'm a freelance writer focusing on culture, blah, blah, blah. And send some through. And suddenly like, if I were having the day-to-day that I had then, now, 2 years later, I'd be like, oh God, this isn't working out for me. But at the time it was like, oh my God, I'm in The Week. I'm in Pop Sugar. I'm in Elite Daily. So it started to take off.
Immediately, or did it kind of trickle in?
Trickle, but I had some big moments, and I think that it's important to set, because you don't have a boss, which like for me is lovely, but sometimes I wish I did, you know what I mean? But you don't have someone to say, slow down, this is a win. Yes. So, when I got into Pop Sugar, I was able to write about refugees and I was able to write about, women who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton and how they feel now. And just write the hell out of every single assignment you get. Yeah. And this is a huge part. You're not going to be, if you don't feel comfortable sharing your own work and calling yourself a writer, nobody else is going to be. Right. So it was almost like declaring, I'm a writer. This is what I'm doing. And I felt like there was a huge shift when I started sharing my stories on Instagram, Facebook. And I wrote for pretty much no money for a couple of friends' luggage companies in travel. So I thought I'd be able to get all my travel stories out. Like I'd smuggled a weapon across the Palestinian border. I was without a passport in Jamaica.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had all these stories.
Yeah.
But it was quite difficult to break into travel. And travel is a hard industry to get into, to be a writer, because it's very desired. A lot of people want to write about travel.
It's super, exactly. It's so desirable because everyone thinks it's a lot more glamorous than it is, which you and I talked about.
But it is, I have to say, it is quite glamorous. Like when you get there, but it's work.
When you get there though. At the beginning, you're not going on these trips and you're not.
Oh yeah, no. I didn't even know what a press trip was. Like, so, but I was writing for my friend's company 3 times a week, getting paid about $20 a story. But I built out a portfolio. Like I wrote about dating, I would write about, what's great about being a freelancer is, you can write about anything, but truly if you're not on staff, the stories you're writing are your idea. So, I mean, I was writing about all these things, and then I got discovered by the Kauai Visitors Bureau, saw a story I wrote about text message breakups for Elite Daily, went to my website, and then they went to the travel section. They're like, oh, this girl writes a lot about travel. And they invited me to a luncheon, and then I just really vibed with my Kauaian hosts. And they ended up taking a chance on me with Kauai and with Switzerland, took a big chance on me in the sense that I wasn't writing for national publications yet. I was, I couldn't confirm any assignments, but just with my passion and enthusiasm, they're like, this girl will write. Yeah. And it was on those trips that I met other editors, and it's sort of serendipitous. But I also, I worked hard for 2 years, a year and a half, which is quite short, hustling. And then, I got those big breaks. And now my focus has really been travel.
So let's go back to because I feel like you kind of leaped into this, which is incredible. But what was that process like? So you left your job and you moved home. When did that come when did you know that you wanted to do that? When did you know that that was what you had to do to pursue your passion? How did you come to that conclusion that you had to quit your job and move home?
I delayed it because I think like anyone else, the idea of removing, particularly at the age of 30, removing yourself from this prescribed path of safety is not one. People fantasize about it. But I gotta say, for me, it was like a light bulb moment. It was like, you went to grad school. And also I got a lot of this is very important too if you're pursuing something creative.
Yeah.
I got a lot of reinforcement, like, you're a good writer, that I needed. Like, I got it in college. I wanted to be a writer, and like that was just a life goal of mine. And I was 30 and I was like, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do this. And it was just, I was just burnt out of trying to make something work that wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And it takes some delusion. Like, I was like, well, when I sell my book, which do I want to do? Do I want to buy a Jeep Wrangler, or do I want to move to Paris? Like, there wasn't like, I didn't go into this being like, I am going to be fiscally insolvent and struggling the rest of my life.
Right.
I went into it being like, well, I'm going to be successful at this because I care about this, and I'm going to hustle and I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And I find that matters, and that passion matters. And
yes.
so I'd say the driving force of becoming a writer, even though it was a eureka moment of I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to get this book published, it didn't end up with I became an author. It ended up with I became a travel writer, but I knew I wanted to become a writer. And I just had hit that point where it was like, now or never, which is a false choice. Like Annie Proulx, who's an amazing, amazing writer. She wrote Brokeback Mountain, The Shipping News. She didn't start writing until she was 50.
Right.
And I think that it's not like you have to do it at a certain point, but I was 30. I like wasn't in a serious relationship, and I was sick of just doing, you know what I mean? And so, I do think part of it too is being single helps you break out on your own.
Yes.
I think in some level it can be nice if you have a partner and it's like, well, he's gonna or she's going to shoulder some of the fiscal.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have been dating anyone while I was building this thing.
So let's go back to you getting into this when you were 30, because I feel like some people, for some reason, 30 is such a scary number to some people. I don't get it. I mean, I'm 29, but like I don't understand it. But a lot of people think, if I don't do this by 30, XYZ. So the fact that you decided to pursue this when you were 30, like how was that? How were you feeling? Were you one of those people that had that timeline of 30 being like, I need to do X, Y, and Z by this age? Or were you just kind of like, now's the time to do it, and here I am?
I think both. I mean, I think that the fear with turning 30 is that people put so much emphasis on your career in your 20s. There's a 30 under 30. Everyone loves the hot young new thing, like Sally Rooney, the amazing Irish novelist. Like, I would read about people who are 23 and getting stuff done. And I think that it's sort of unspoken, but people don't talk about this enough, because people are like, 20s are for making the mistakes, 30s are for figuring it out. Mm-hmm. But I think when they say 30s are for figuring it out, like, I think 30 is the biggest decade for your career. Because I do think that unless you are really lucky or really driven, or also like, I didn't have the guts to take a risk of taking a pay cut and being an editorial assistant, you know, and going from like 100K to like 20K in my 20s, because I also had other priorities, as mentioned, socializing, as mentioned, not living at home. But I think that, there's this idea that if you're going to be successful, it's got to be in your 20s. And I think that's so antiquated, because I think the reason people think that, particularly for women, I don't think you hear that for men as often, is because it's like, well, your 30s are for dedicated to having kids and getting pregnant. And I think that at the end of the day, like, 20s are for mistakes, but like, I also feel like you sort of have to wear yourself out in the wrong direction before you get in the right one. Yeah. And I have a lot of friends who have gotten married who sort of haven't, unfortunately, because it's hard to have like an ambitious 2-person, 2-career household where their dreams have sort of gone a little bit, and who's to say they're probably happier? I don't know. I'm having a miserable week, so most likely this week, but there's this idea that you have to make those decisions by the time you're 20, because by the time you're married, you're no longer able to prioritize yourself. Right. And then, I think that there's this idea of doing it in your 20s, because in your 30s, you're going to want stability. Yeah. But for me, I felt the confidence to make myself unstable in my 30s, because I'd had that stability. I knew what it would be like to continue working in advertising or continuing doing something that was somewhat creative, and I wasn't satisfied by it. Yeah. So I think that I felt the same way. Like when I got older, every year I was like, oh my God, what do I have to show for it? I'm 1 year older. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And I was quite terrified to turn 30, because I felt it was like the end of the road. Mm-hmm. But then weirdly, when I turned 30, and people don't say this enough either, like, I felt young again. I was like, I'm 30. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, whatever. And I'd removed myself from this false timeline that I think a lot of people have, which is I've got to get this, this, and this done by 30. Yes. And when I realized that I wasn't on that timeline, I felt very free to pursue my own. Mm-hmm. And I cared about keeping up with the Joneses as much as anyone. Like, it's much easier to have health insurance. It's much easier to not be living in your childhood bedroom for like a year. Right. You know what I mean? A year and a half. Yeah. And but that was a choice I was willing to make also because I felt like I went so hard in the other direction. Like, I love New York City and I love my friends and I miss being able to see them as regularly, but like I'd gone out so much.
Yes.
I've done all the things all the time. You know, I've been to like 32 bachelorette parties. Like, it wasn't like,
oh my gosh.
I don't know that at 22, I could have been like, I'm gonna live at home and finish this novel. And then even with travel, the past 2 years, I traveled the world like a plague was coming. Like, when travel started taking off, I again had a choice, which was, do I get a teaching position in New York City and an apartment? Or, you know, and this was at the very beginning, it's like, I'm getting these trip offers. Do I want to tie myself to an apartment, or do I want to become a global nomad? I hate that term, but do I want to become a full-time travel writer?
Right.
And I went with the travel writing.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, like, I mean, amazing experiences, but I missed things that I don't know that I would have felt comfortable missing in my 20s.
At that
like,
age. Yeah. It was, you needed a little maturity.
You need maturity. And I also think your 20s are very important for building community.
Yeah.
Like, I have like a huge network of friends in New York and I have a lot of buddies everywhere now that I'm like, I need this to feel safe, to almost branch out on my own.
Yeah.
And in your 30s, you still need that. And I think that people always say it's harder to make friends in your 30s than your 20s. I don't know that I agree with that, particularly because I feel like I love new people. It's good. I'm a reporter. I want to know everything. But I do feel that for some people, for some personality types, perhaps it is more difficult. So I found that like traveling the world at my 30s, pursuing what I want to do in my 30s was almost easier.
That makes perfect sense. And so, okay, so how long did you move home and where is home for you?
Home is right outside New York, which made it much easier. I like would have like living arrangements that were sort of temporary. Like, my friends would have a guest bedroom and I would stay there 4 nights a week.
Okay.
And I did that for about a year and a half. It's so funny. My timeline feels like so vague. I'm like, when did all this happen? This is nuts. But I feel like I quit my job in March or got let go. Telling your own narrative is very important. Do you know what I mean? In my head, I'm like, I quit and I wandered off. But like, I think about this sometimes. I'm like, had they not let me go, how long would I have, you know, I do think things happen for a reason, but like I needed that kick maybe. But so probably in March. And then I was writing
of what year?
March of 3 years ago. I don't know.
Okay. 3 Marches ago.
3 Marches ago. I was traveling on March of 2017.
Okay.
And then by April 2017, I was on my first trip. Do you know what I mean? Like, it happened like, quickly. And I'm very lucky that it happened very quickly.
Do you credit that to like having, you know, the contacts that you did to help you learn how to pitch and, you know, how to build your portfolio? Like, what do you credit that quick movement to? Because I feel like people that want to get into travel writing, it takes a while.
I credit to a couple things. First, it's I wanted to be a writer before I wanted to become a travel writer, because people who want to because travel writing is, what I love about travel writing the most is that you can write about so many different topics under the umbrella of travel. And I'm so curious about other people. And I really believe that travel develops empathy. Like, it's like Mark Twain has a quote, like, travel is fatal for prejudice, hatred, for bigotry, hatredness, and narrow-mindedness. Like, and then it's hard for mankind to develop a charitable view of other people just festering in their own part of the world. And for me, I grew up traveling a lot, and like moments that really made an impact on me. Like, I remember, because I'd come out to Wyoming a lot, like visiting Native American reservations, or like I was obsessed with Gone with the Wind, as I think every like 13-year-old headstrong, like whatever. But I was like, ooh, this is problematic. Do you know what I mean? But then going to the South in like 13, I watched Mississippi burning, and I went to the Civil Rights Museum, and like being like, this is insane. And now it's obviously, you know what I mean? Just and my mind was expanded.
Very curious.
I'm very curious, and I felt like whenever I came back from somewhere, I felt the need to share with everyone. If you wanted to get into travel writing, do what I did, which was I wrote about places I'd already been to. And if you haven't been to that many places, write about where you're from. And like do different takes on it. Like, particularly now more than ever with like, you know, with we're all doing domestic. If you're from Oklahoma City, which is very cool, by the way, write about Oklahoma City. And this is hard because I think that like this is the second part of a career journey that I'm not fully equipped to talk about yet, because I think women aren't great at like saying what their rates are. But I'm telling you, like, be comfortable writing for very little. Unfortunately, at the beginning, that is just going to happen. And then you'll work your way up from there. But
Are you at the point where you are pretty firm on your rates and you're like, this is what I'm worth? Or are you still like, I want to accept as many opportunities as I can?
Well, now I'm at a point where like I don't write for free anymore. You know, and
Right.
I'm still given those options to do
Yes.
so that maybe at the beginning I would have said yes to, but it
Yes.
just doesn't make sense for me to do it.
Right.
And I really focus on the outlet.
Yeah.
So I wrote for Forbes for several years, and before that I wrote for Brit & Co. And what I will say is you want to really develop a relationship with an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you get your first story, and like, I mean, I'm not perfect. Like sometimes I feel like the more I care about a story, the less likely I am to turn it in before midnight the day it's due, because you're always researching.
Right.
But
Right.
enthusiasm and like, yeah, like see, like for Forbes and for Brit & Co, I was writing for them so regularly, and that was good for my
Yeah.
portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing with travel is people want to see that you're writing all the time.
Yes.
There are some people who want to get into travel writing and they write once a month or once every other month.
Yeah.
That's not going to fly, because if you're writing once every other month, why would you be traveling more than twice a year? Do you know what I mean? People,
Yeah.
you should be writing comparable to the amount that you're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that to torpedo your career is to travel and take too many trips and
Mm-hmm.
not be able to write about them. So now where I'm at is like, I'm trying to break into some, like I have my first story coming out for Departures magazine, which like,
Really
I'm very excited about. It's
exciting.
going to go online on the 28th. So I'm like, there are certain places that I really want to do. And
What's
like,
the story about? Can you tell us?
it's
or-
about the best road trips in the American West.
I love it.
And so that's another like write about what's going on with you. Like, I mean, I'm very, you know, I love Wyoming. So it's very Wyoming centric. But I've also found that like, if you know a place and you go with your gut about the place, it's much better than sort of crowdsourcing. Like, okay, I got to include Zion because that's like, no, like if you know it and it speaks to you, use that.
Yeah.
And then I love first person narrative stories. But I'm almost going back to the beginning of my cycle, because now I'm pitching a ton and I got to flex that muscle again. And it's very nerve wracking in a way to be like, I'm going to send this out. But my advice is literally don't overthink it, unfortunately, like, because it can be very easy to spend forever on a pitch. There are a couple pitches that I took 2 days on and I was like, this is gold. If they don't accept it, and they don't, do you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
And then there are some pitches where I'm like sleep deprived and like, I've got to cross this off my to-do list, and then they take it. So it's a numbers game. Send out a ton. Obviously tailor it to your publication. Look at what's been published and try to pitch similar stories. Be open to editorial feedback, but also like, it's almost like now from my end, like when I receive stuff from a publicist, like from travel publicists, I'm not always going to take everything. I take very little actually. And if that's the same with editors and journalists, you know?
Right.
And here's another thing. A lot of people, I think, who want to be travel writers, journalists in general, have a glorified view of themselves that I think doesn't serve you, especially in travel. Like if you go into something and you're like, and this is I think it stems from insecurity. I think it also stems from whatever. It's like, I've been to Peru 80 times before and this isn't up to snuff. It's like, that is just people, nobody's going to want to work with you because they're like, ooh, this girl's discerning. They're going to be like, it's not your job to be unimpressed.
Right.
And it's really not your job. Like, I try to work with countries mainly. And like, if I land in like, say, St. Lucia, like I've heard people be like, I didn't find a story there. I'm like, did you walk outside? Because like, it's not your job to be bored. It's your job to find the story. And be easy to work with. Like, just like be nice. I have like these rules, like curious, kind, and vulnerable is where I feel like people can't help but like you if you ask a lot of questions. If you're nice, like just don't be rude, which can be hard. I mean, everyone gets in bad moods sometimes, but like really be a normal person and take it out on yourself internally. Don't take it out on the people around you. And then be vulnerable, which is being vulnerable to me is like asking questions and not worrying about, oh, is this an obvious question? Usually the most obvious questions elicit like the most interesting responses. Like sometimes I ask a question I know the answer to, but I want to know your take, you know? And make fun of yourself. That comes with vulnerability. Like be self-deprecating, just be open. And like, when I started travel writing, I'd gone through a breakup right before I started doing this. So I felt extremely unhinged. I was like, great, I've got no boyfriend, know where I'm living. Like I'm literally on a plane all the time. And I would make fun of that. And like people would connect to that. And so don't like, and travel is such a personal thing and writing is that when you're talking to someone, you don't need to keep it, if it's a cab driver or if it's like an industry representative or if it's like your guide, you don't need to be like, well, what's your favorite restaurant? You can be, or is it busy? You could be like, talk about breakups,
Right.
talk about death, like go deep.
Yeah, life.
People
About
like
life.
that. Yes, people love that.
So what was your first big feature? Like the first one that made you really excited. You're like, I can't believe that my stuff is published here.
The week. So I wrote about finances, which we've gone over how bad I am at it.
Yeah.
But so there's this thing called Binders full of full-time freelance writers on Facebook group. It's great. And they have call for pitches. And the week was like call for finance pitches. And I sent a couple through. And they were like, these are like, we want more on this line. So then I pitched a couple more and they took it. And my story was like awesome. Honestly, I love these stories.
Yeah.
And it was funny and very me. And it was in the week, which for me was like, that was like huge. I was like, wow, like I'm in the week.
Yeah.
But I mean, there have been a couple moments like that, like Elite Daily getting my first Pop Sugar. And here's something I have to say. I've written about travel for places that are not travel endemic. Do you know what I mean? And like also like people can be super rude about female millennial publications and be like, ooh, an Architectural Digest. My first story for Architectural Digest. I was like, huge. Oh God, yes. But you know, I wasn't traveling the world on Arc Digest and The Week. I was traveling the world on like Brit & Co.
Right.
And sometimes people would just be like dismissive. And I'm like, my editor at Brit & Co. is like just as good as my editor, or better than like, and all these other places. And like, just because it's catered towards young women does not make it trivial. Yeah. And I find that to be so sexist and as a woman self-hating, but also like, if you act like you're only good enough for the New Yorker and you save your good work for the New Yorker, that's bullshit. Do you know what I mean? Like my favorite story I've written was about my first trip to Kenya, first and like, you know, my first and only trip to Kenya. Yes. And it was my first time in Africa, like below Northern Africa. Yes. And it was life-changing. And then there was all this stuff going into it where I was like, I want to write about this in a way that really captures it. Yeah. And there's also these like, you know, you get nervous to be like, oh, I don't want to write white girl goes to Africa story. Exactly. And then people are going to be, but then the flip side of that is I'm not going to write 10 things not to do on safari. Right. So, but the story I wrote and the story that I was like really excited about, like, I mean, I pretty much was like the story of the people that I met. I went to Nairobi and Yuki Masai Mara. I met the deputy president. Wow. So it was like, I was called like, why now is the time to come home to Africa? Because when I landed, the deputy president was like, welcome home. And he goes, doesn't matter if you're from Asia, if you're from Europe, if you're from South America, when you come to Kenya, Kenya is the birthplace of mankind. Wow. You're coming home. Like, and it was just so beautiful. And the whole time I was there, I really felt this, I cried every day. I loved it. I felt such an immense connection to where I was. And Kenyan humor is like, it's just like very self-deprecating. Do you know what I mean? And like I vibe with that. And I have 3 siblings. Like I'm from a family of 6. Everyone's always making fun of me. And like, you know, people are also excited by your excitement. Like I was crying at these zebras, and Kefa, my guide, was like, "These are literally the donkeys of the African bush. Like, what's your problem?" And like, and I feel like sometimes people don't tell the story of a place, and that's number one a problem because they're not enough. I mean, I see this story like 15 Black travel writers to read now because there are so many amazing Black travel writers, travel editors. But you know, people have heard enough of stories that are like I want to put my own personal thing on it because I think that ties people in. Last summer is when I started solo travel and I loved it. Like I think, and I'm such a people person. I like being around people, but once I started solo traveling, I kind of was like, this is actually the way to go. So what are your thoughts on solo travel? Because I enjoy it. And I know a lot of people are a little bit nervous about it. You know, they're like, am I going to be bored? Am I going to meet people? Who's going to take my photos? Like, what are your solo travel tips? Honestly, mine are to book yourself 9 till 9. Like some people are like, and that's so opposite of so many people are like, I like just to land in a country and explore. Yes. I find that's very difficult for me to do. I have ADD, number one. Like I am not going to be, but also like, I feel like it's so easy if you're in another place, so you don't have someone else keeping you accountable to scroll Instagram or like go on a deep dive about like Real Housewives of Beverly Hills drama when you're in New Zealand. Like book yourself. And for me, like what I found is that if you're going to do solo travel, I think it's the best to do an activity. Like my best times where I've gone in knowing no one, like this trek in Peru, this trek in Nepal, I would never have said, oh, I'm an adventure travel writer, just because it's super, like, they're so gendered, like, this idea, like, I mean, my friend Cassandra Clue, she's an adventure traveler, and she has this great stuff on it, too, like, there's this idea you can't wear lipstick and you can't be trivial and like, but I
Mhm.
find that if you're doing outdoor travel and adventure immersive travel, you can't help but be fully in it. Like when I was in the
Right.
Amazon and like there's no Wi-Fi, like lose the Wi-Fi, go on a trek. If you're not up for trekking, go on a nature cruise,
Yes.
go on like some sort of, you know, for me at least, that's how I can do solo travel.
Okay.
And part of the reason is because I want to build in local friends.
Yeah, so
And
that was my other question. How do you go about meeting people and like diving into the local experiences versus doing the touristy things that everyone does? I like the local experiences when I travel.
it starts, so there are a couple ways, but I think the easiest way to get that is to book a trip where your guide, like in the Amazon, our guides were from the Amazon. In Nepal,
Mhm.
obviously, our guides from the, book a trip where you're going to have guides, where you're going to have
So you
local
recommend
ambassadors to
having
the place.
guides?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
And like
okay.
local, like at the end of the day, like you don't need like an American girl taking you around Austria. Do you know what I mean?
Does
Like,
make sense. Like, have you ever felt unsafe while traveling? Because I have heard, stories of, and I haven't experienced too much of this, but friends that have traveled to places and have had really weird cab rides or just weird interactions. Have you ever experienced any of that as a female solo traveler?
I don't know. I have a lot of trust, which maybe is
Yeah.
crazy, but
Yeah.
also though, like I think that's why making friends is so important. Like
Yes.
I've been in a lot of places where I've been like alone, but I've established a rapport with at
Mm-hmm.
least one human that I'm like, this person's got my back, you know? And
Yeah.
also, if you're kind about a country and about a place and you're curious, people are going to want to show you the best parts of that place. Or I don't know. I've been in a lot of situations where I'm like, this could be sketchy. I'm just going to trust it. And it works.
Yeah.
But also, and this is like, and I mean, this is like hard because obviously they're outlining things, but
Yeah.
if you humanize yourself to someone and they look at you as a person, I
Yeah.
find you're going to be less likely to be in danger.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you feel nervous, I advocate being friendly and like not shutting up. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
I felt nervous, I'm like,
For
so then
sure.
this, so much
Yeah.
about this, you know, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And,
We'll leave her alone.
but people are good. Like
Yes.
truly, I find people are fundamentally good around the world. I
Yeah.
truly feel that way.
I do think I think it's good to have that trust, but also to be on your P's and Q's when you are traveling alone and just like use street smarts. Don't be like weary of everyone. Just use street smarts.
Use street smarts, but be careful. If you look too nervous, I think
Yeah, I
that's
think that's a
insulting to
bad
someone.
right. So in the current state of travel, like what are you doing now? What are your stories about? Where are you traveling? Are you traveling anywhere? Are you kind of staying put?
I'm looking to stay put till the end of the year
Okay.
and focusing a lot on road trips.
Okay.
So I cover the Caribbean for Trip Savvy, so I'm still covering Caribbean travel.
Okay.
And I'm really playing it by ear because like I'm lucky that I've traveled so many places that like I don't need to go there to
You've
write
got
certain stories.
stories just
I've
yeah.
got stories lined up,
Yeah.
but I am gonna see what it looks like for next year
Okay.
because and I think just like everyone else, it's week by week. Like I do think travel will bounce back in a major way.
Yeah.
I do think that there are some places where it's safer to almost travel than
Yeah.
it is to just meander. Because I mean, no offense, South Dakota, maybe but like South Dakota, when I went through, like wasn't wearing any masks, and like
Yeah.
I was in a motel in Minnesota that like the owner was a COVID denier. And I do think that like, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
this is where we're going to see a gap between luxury and budget travel. But like luxury entities have more of the funding to
Yes.
prioritize safety.
Yes.
And so I think there's going to be a spike in that
Mm-hmm.
in the terms of like, but I think it's going to be interesting to see, like, I think that when we are able to travel again, like I know just for me, like I'd always wanted to go to Antarctica. I wasn't able to go last fall. I'm like, I'm going to try to get myself to these places.
And so in a normal world, which we're not in right now, how much of your time do you spend traveling? How much of your time do you spend at home? And I have a follow-up question to that. How consistent is your home? Because you're in Wyoming right now. Like how are you going to be there for long? Are you planning on leaving if things
Yeah.
up? Like, so that's a two-part question.
When I was traveling full time, I'd say I'd be home 5 days and away 20 days. Like insane. Like I'd
Wow.
have months where I was gone.
So I like to wrap up each show with a shot. which is something small and strong that you want to pass on, a piece of advice, people that want to pursue travel writing, people that want to just travel, just see more of the world. And you've given so much advice already, which has been so helpful, I'm sure, to people that are aspirational travel writers, but what's a shot that you want to pass on?
Okay, I'm gonna quote Bill Murray here.
Okay.
With his one line, he says, "I try to be available for life to happen to me." And I feel like that's huge with traveling, say yes.
Yes.
But also, like, when you're starting out on your own, in your own career,
Yeah.
don't have a rigid idea. Like, don't have a rigid idea of where you think you're gonna end up, because I'd always wanted to be a travel writer, but I thought it was such an unrealistic goal. Like, I thought being a travel writer was like being a rock star. Like, I would read about someone who went to Nepal and wrote a story, and like, it made me pissed. You know what I mean? I was like, I'll never be that.
Yeah.
And I ended up there because I feel like enthusiasm, and I was just like available for things. Like, and on trips, whenever you travel, you're gonna come away with a million stories.
Mm-hmm.
But you can shut yourself off to the best story by chasing down what you think it's gonna be.
Yes.
Like, I research before I go to a country, but I don't do that much. Like, I really don't. I don't want to read other people's takes on a city. I want to go in and feel it out, and I want to see what my own associations are, and that goes with trusting people. You know, someone's gonna write in and be like, this is a recipe to getting kidnapped.
Yeah.
But you know, I forget in 30 Rock, they're like, never follow a hippie to a second location.
Yeah.
I follow that hippie to like the 7th location, you know, and just because people want to be around positivity. People want to be around other people who make them feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of the end of the day. Travel writing is also vacationing. Like, people don't want to go somewhere with you and like explore this like canyon if you've just got a bad attitude the whole time. You know, be positive and be available for life to happen to you. I
love that. And what I love about our conversation is I feel like you've made travel writing seem not easy to get into, but so much more attainable. You know, like there is a way for people that are aspiring to do it, but also you have to be in it for the right reasons. That's been my main takeaway, is that you have to actually truly enjoy the writing and writing about travel, and not be in it for the perks and the trips and all of that, because it comes, but that's not what it's about. Oh, well, thank you so much, Katie. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and you are making me so excited for hopefully when the world opens back up and we can actually leave the US again. Like, not that I haven't enjoyed exploring this country, because I've gone to new places here, and I really enjoyed being forced to travel within the US, but I'm ready to go.
Me too.
So fingers crossed that, you know, we have a positive outcome with the election and things start to open up next.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Katie.